Welcome to our live webcast, Internal Partnerships that Drive Inclusion and Diversity Success. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ashton Chapman, and I will be providing features of the web event technology, managing the chat, and presenting the session facilitator. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of the web event technology that we'll be using today. So at any time, you can adjust your audio using any computer volume settings that you have enabled. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the Q&A and chat window. There's a large window which holds all of your sent messages and a smaller text box at the top where you will type in your questions. To send a question, it's important that you click in the text box and type your chat. When finished, click the Ask button. Your questions will be responded to at the end of the presentation as time permits. I'm so excited to share that we are joined today by our session facilitator, the wonderful Shalynne Jackson, who serves as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer with the City of Oklahoma City. Shalynne is founder and principal consultant of Shalynne Jackson Consulting, as well as a former inclusion strategist for Fortune 500 companies, Walmart Inc. and OneOK Inc. I invite you to review Shalynne's bio. There's so much more to learn about her, which can be accessed via the DEI Summit virtual event platform. At this time, I'd love to turn the microphone over to session presenter Shalynne Jackson to get us started. Welcome.
Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Shalynne Jackson, and I am the Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer with the City of Oklahoma City. I know that we are short on time, so I will just say I'm very accessible. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, reach out via email. I'm here, and I can tell you more about myself via one of those forms. In this session, we are going to identify important internal partnerships, examine the unique role each partner plays, and explore best practices in strengthening these relationships. I&D touches essentially every part of our organization, so it's important to mitigate territorialism and burning bridges by proactively building these relationships. One thing you'll learn about me today is that I am very direct, respectfully, and so you gotta call a spade, and territorialism can be a real thing in organizations, period. That's one thing that I&D can help mitigate, but first we have to mitigate these things by building these relationships strategically and with intention. We have to be intentional so that people don't feel like we need to stay in our lane. And I'm doing this, I'm having the air quotes because I don't really care for that statement, but it is true. And people can have those sentiments, especially in the very beginning of an organization's I&D efforts, inclusion and diversity. Just because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know.
I'm sorry, Ronnie, I got caught up. Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Oh, can someone mute? Okay. You don't know what you don't know. And so, when you're new to an organization and people are trying to figure out or get a feel for what I&D is, it can really feel like you can be crossing over into their lane or crossing into the work that they do. But what we all know, I'm sure on this call, is that when done right, other departments begin to seek out our opinions and even become I&D advocates, learning to incorporate I&D into all that they do, which is ultimately our goal. It should be our goal from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. And you'll see that I use I&D and D&I interchangeably. There's a reason for that. We can talk about that another time. But from a D&I standpoint, our goal should ultimately be that we should not always have to be in the room for D&I to be present, a priority, and top of mind. So jumping in, let's talk about the critical internal partners. Look, you will see different departments on this throughout this presentation that you all may not call it that, or someone else may have that responsibility. Don't get stuck in those details to where you really lose what it is that we're really trying to say, and that's build a rapport, build a relationship, and make sure that we're doing this all together. Because as a new mom of my second baby, I can say I am reminded that it takes a village, and that's where the title of this presentation comes from. We're all in this together. So you see here the departments that we'll talk about today: human resources, communication and marketing, community relations, product development, procurement and purchasing, IT, and legal are the ones that we'll talk about today. getting straight to it, and I will zoom through these because I know that, especially from a talent acquisition standpoint, we are probably all very familiar with the ways that I&D can partner with talent acquisition to accomplish mutual goals, but I do want to touch on a few of them. So one of them being interview training. It is really important that I&D is integrated into interview training. A lot of times you'll have organizations that have interview training for those that are interviewing on the organization's behalf, but they separate or don't talk about D&I in those trainings. And so it's really important to say, hey, one, do we have a diverse panel? When these hiring managers are picking who will be on their interview panels, do they understand that it is important to make sure that there's diversity there? A lot of times we like to just look at gender and race, and that's not the only aspects of diversity that we want to make sure that we are integrating. One that's really important from an interview standpoint would be, are you an introvert or an extrovert? And making sure that you have both on your panel when possible is really important. And the list goes on, right? Another thing that's really important here is making sure that we're talking about unconscious bias, but talking about unconscious bias in a way that ensures that people are checking their bias from the jump. When the interview starts, there's a statistic out there that says, there's some research out there that says we typically make our decision on if we're going to hire someone or not right when they walk in the room in the first couple of seconds. So what I like to challenge people to do is that decision, spend the rest of the interview kind of challenging that decision a little bit, right? If you say, oh, I'm going to hire this person, ask yourself why. Is it because you automatically were able to connect with the person because they are like you in many different ways? Or if you feel that, oh, I don't want to hire this person, they walk in, again, ask yourself why. Is it because they were different than you in many different ways? Another thing that I'll say, I like to give this example. There was a time at one of the organizations that I worked for that they didn't have unconscious bias training in their interview trainings. And ultimately, one of the people leaders, after he saw that the unconscious bias segment, once they added it, he said, listen, after an interview took place, he said, I asked my people, what is it that you noticed about this candidate when they first walked in? All of the candidates. And one of the candidates they they said, well, this person was really unprofessional because they wore a hat to the interview. Mind you, though, they were interviewing for a field position. They were interviewing at the corporate office, but they were interviewing for a field position. So what they were able to talk through is, does that really matter? Because when people from the corporate office go into the field, they're encouraged, don't wear your heels, don't wear your nice outfit, wear your boots, wear your jeans, wear your hats, right? And so what they were able to do after that, it was to say, is that really something that should be held against this person? And that person was ultimately seen as the best candidate for that role. But I can't tell you, and the hiring leader says, I don't know before we started to check our biases, if that person would have been that high on our radar, because we automatically, many people on the panel automatically said this person was unprofessional, which wasn't fair or accurate. I like to give that example on why it's important that we're educating people whenever they're, touching any part of talent acquisition, but especially interviewing, why it's important. The next thing I'll say is recruiting best practices. I really don't think that I have to go too much into detail here, but it's just really important for I&D and talent acquisition to work together to identify best practices when we're recruiting. Part of that being with career fairs, right? So whenever we go to career fairs, are we making sure that there's different representation there? Oftentimes, before people look through the I&D lens, they like to take their SMEs or their, people leaders or, senior leaders to their career fairs. Understand that, for example, say we're going to a university career fair. Are you taking a recent graduate from that university? Because people want to be able, those students want to be able to ask, like, how was your transition? What was it like? What else should I make sure that I learn while I'm here at the university to make sure that I'm one of the, best candidates or a good intern or whatever that is for this organization? And oftentimes that's going to come from your recent graduates. Same with, we talked about it, gender, race, ethnicity, different types of representation is important to take to these career fairs. Another one would be candidate sourcing. Where are we finding our candidates? One here that I really like to talk about is making sure that we're leveraging, from an I&D standpoint, our business resource groups, employee resource groups, affinity groups, impact groups, whatever it is that you call them. But how are we leveraging them to make sure that we are, one, going to the right place, but also that they're going with us. We need to make sure that that representation is there and that they are able to help us drive this change through our organization. The next one I would say is recruiting collateral. We already know this, right? But if you have one of the standing, I like to call it a scroll, but it's not a scroll, or any pamphlets that you give out, what do those pictures look like? Who is on those pamphlets, on this collateral, to make sure that people see themselves working at your organization? It is very, very important. And then last, with talent acquisition, I will say external relationships are big on both sides. So from an inclusion and diversity standpoint, we're already in the community, right? And so as we're building these relationships and we hear about opportunities for our organization to be engaged with different recruiting, whether it's career fairs or interview training or review resumes, whatever that could be for these external organizations, are we partnering them with our talent acquisition team and saying, hey, talent acquisition, this is a way to be involved in the community and to get some return on investment, right? And sometimes you don't see that return on investment early, and that's okay. But you just have to stay the course, but make sure that you're investing your time in the right place. And then the opposite applies. If talent acquisition knows of external partnerships that have reached out to them or they're reaching out to, it's really, really important for them to engage I&D for a number of reasons. One being, are we making sure that that is the most inclusive organization that we can be involved in? A lot of times you have people throughout the organization that are doing some volunteerism and they are very passionate about it, but they may not know that how that organization, their views or their stances might not necessarily be the same as ours. And so talent acquisition can really lean on I&D to say, are we working with organizations that are aligned and, passionate about the same types of things that we are, or the equity that we're seeking to pursue? So next, I will say employee relations, really, really big. Here, performance reviews. I know that in concept, a lot of us understand that it's really important to hold leaders accountable, but it's important to work with your employee relations team or whoever owns the performance review process. Again, let's not get stuck on departments, but we know someone in your organization is responsible for performance reviews, right? Well, how are we incorporating an inclusive leadership competency in those performance reviews? This way we can really, truly hold leaders accountable. But beyond just the competency, I've seen at different organizations where they'll put inclusive leadership as a competency, but what they don't do is really say, what is that? Like, what does that mean? And so you leave your leaders to assume or to make up what inclusive leadership is. And then you may have a lot of people that just meets expectation, or, hey, you far exceed. I saw you hire a few diverse candidates. No. That is not necessarily meeting that goal. And so I&D needs to work with the employee relations team to really say, when we say that XYZ, this person is an inclusive leader, this is what we mean. And we need to communicate that to our leaders so that then they understand, how do you attain this goal? Beyond that, though, there are various ways. And one that we're working on internally is an inclusive leadership education catalog, and then a way to track their engagement. Where this came from was, and I'm very, very proud to say, before I started with the organization, and I'm the first in my role, in February, leadership had said, listen, everyone needs 6 hours of D&I training. Great. I was so proud that as a D&I practitioner, I did not have to come in to fight for that. A lot of people have to fight for that. But what I was able to say was, it's really important to give them options. They shouldn't have to sit and wait on I&D or HR to say, here is a D&I training, or here is a D&I book club. So working with employee relations and a few other departments, so you'll hear about this a couple of times, but working with them to build a catalog. Listen, you can read these books, you can watch these movies, you can listen to this podcast, you can engage in these trainings, and put it on our SharePoint site to let leaders go pull those opportunities and then go track these opportunities internally. What you see there circled in red, though, is it's really important to also be able to report. So mind you, we're talking about performance reviews. We need to give leaders an opportunity or a way to say, okay, did the leaders in my organization, in my business segment, accomplish this goal? Oh my gosh, so-and-so did 12, that exceeds expectation. So-and-so did 6, Great, that meets expectations. I'm sure that you all see where I'm going here, but this is a very strong partnership, and it takes a lot of buy-in from a number of departments, including senior leaders, to implement something like that. But then to make it actually possible and to apply it, you need a number of departments on board. The next thing I'll say is inclusive policies and procedures. Again, I'm sure that I'm preaching to the choir, so I won't stay here long, but it's really important for employee relations to not feel like we need to keep D&I out of the room, but to say, oh my goodness, we need D&I's perspective on almost all policies and procedures. So when they're looking at these policies and procedures, to say, hey, D&I, this is where we landed on our parental leave, for example. And then D&I being able to weigh in to say, you're good to go, this is inclusive, or, let's seek out some more voices to make sure that we are the most inclusive that we can be. Are we including adoption? Are we including fathers in the conversation, domestic partners? Let's make sure that we're inclusive. And employee relations needs to see us as an asset in that process. Another thing I will say is EEO and affirmative action. Look, I know that we probably all have to say this till we're blue in the face, but it's really important that people do not believe that we are the ones that set the affirmative action plans, right? D&I is not about a quota, and I will scream that from a mountaintop. It is not about a quota. It's about hiring the best candidates, but making sure that we're widening our pool and giving everyone access. What's important here is that if your organization does have to create affirmative action plans, hey, D&I can help with those, not be responsible for them. But one example is good faith efforts. With affirmative action, you're required to do good faith efforts. D&I is full of good faith efforts, right? Let's go back to our business resource groups, for example. They're doing things in the community. They're, doing different things for our organization. How are we making sure that the employee relations team is leveraging those actions as good faith efforts that we didn't even have to plan, right? The BRGs are going to do their thing regardless, but you can leverage some of the work that they're doing for your affirmative action. But it takes that relationship and that respect to say, hey, we want to look at what it is that you're doing and add it here into our efforts. Another thing is diversity scorecards. So working with employer relations to say, look, how many new hires did we have by identity? How many involuntary and voluntary promotions, or sorry, not promotions. I'm pretty sure everyone is going to say yes to a promotion. Not everyone, but how many involuntary and voluntary demotions did we have, or separations? And let's look at those by identity. This is something that you partner with employee relations, right? A lot of times it's really important to also remember that these partnerships also help us because typically our I&D departments are small. And so if we don't try to conquer it all, we can go faster when we are doing it together, right? And so if employee relations is really helping drive this and sees this as a part of their responsibilities, they can help us accomplish our goals much sooner, just better because other perspectives and hands are on it. The last thing I'll say about employee relations would be employee engagement surveys. We all know, hopefully, or feel, or if you don't feel this way, I would love to hear, how do you do your I&D benchmarks? For me, it is really important that we are asking our people, how happy are you? I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Gallup Q12, but they ask, do you have a best friend at work? And I know that some people may feel like a best friend, yes, a best friend. Like it's important not to even remove best from there because we can all say, okay, I have some friends at work. No, do you have a best friend at work? And this is the kind of thing that you can partner with your employee relations team to either get started or to make sure that we are including the right questions to capture inclusion and make sure that we're tracking our efforts. Or our efforts are going in the right direction for our employees' needs. The next thing I would say is HR talent development. So with HR talent development, we obviously know succession planning. Look, some organizations are not looking at succession planning strategically. I would like to hope that everyone on this call is. But if you are, even if you aren't, it's really important to partner with your talent development team to say, look, succession planning is really important for I&D too. So how can we do this together to make sure that we're being really inclusive? There have been multiple times, especially from a consulting standpoint, that organizations' best efforts, like they really are trying, but you look at their succession plan and they all look the same. I&D should help bring that lens to this conversation, but in a way that does not make people feel like they're necessarily bad. You should have noticed this. That is not how they should feel. It should be more so, hey, I noticed this in our succession plans. Can we talk about how we can diversify this and be strategic here? So the next thing would be training and program pilots. I do want to stay here just for a second and really drive a point home with business resource groups. A lot of companies are not leveraging them the best way that we can. With business resource groups, again, affinity groups, whatever it is that you all call them, there's multiple ways that we can leverage them in this work specifically. Whether it's, I've seen or I've experienced in organizations where we leverage our business resource group to build different programs. So one of the organizations that I worked for example, their women's resource group said, listen, public speaking is an issue for women typically. That does not mean that men don't have issues with public speaking. So our allies can also be engaged in this program, but we want to build a program called Professionally Speaking. And what that did was it really helped their constituents really say, this is how you can, create an elevator speech. If you're on the elevator with the CEO and the CEO says, how are you doing? You only have a few floors to really, put on your best, put your best out there, but put your best foot forward. And this program helped them with things like that, even from a training standpoint. How is it that you can give effective presentations tied to your responsibilities? Well, the organizational development team saw that it was great and said, we want to bring this in-house. We want our team to manage it so that you all don't have to manage the logistics, because this is great. That's one example. Another example being if the organizational development or talent development team has their own programs that they want to pilot, they're not ready to push out to the whole organization. Let's talk to our business resource groups, have them sit through it and give us some feedback so that we can make sure it's the best product and meeting the needs for all of our employees. The next thing that I would say is mentor and sponsorship programs. Again, they can be handled in many different places in the organization, but whoever handles them, one, leveraging our business resource groups is great, or even just leveraging our inclusion and diversity teams to help with these programs. What's specifically important here, one of the things that are important in my opinion, is making sure that we are integrating I&D into these concepts. So I'll give you one example. As we just recently launched our Mentor Circle pilot, what we did was on one of the topics, our upcoming topic is effective communication. And instead of giving the traditional advice of eye contact and talk slow and all of those things, those should be repetitive for people, right? Like people should have already heard that, and I understand it's not good to assume. So I'll tell you how we address that. But what we did with our resources and the conversations that they're going to have is really driving the differences in communications across culture and how do you communicate effectively across culture. So one of them being nonverbal cues. In a lot of cultures, looking people in the eye is a sign of respect. But in other cultures, that's not a sign of respect. And you'd be surprised how many people don't know that. And so in our mentorship programs, we're going to talk about when we're looking at these nonverbal cues that traditionally we say make eye contact, how can we make sure we're building relationships with people internally so we understand where they're coming from if they don't look us in the eyes? So that way, when it comes time for a performance review time or promotion time, we're not holding something against someone and it wasn't even their intent. A lot of times we say, well, this person doesn't look you in the eye, or this person doesn't have much of a facial expression, therefore they're very disengaged and they're not interested. And in their opinion, they could be like, man, I'm showing them the utmost respect and I'm ready for a promotion. There's going to be that breakdown if you don't talk and build relationships with your people about what nonverbal cues can mean to different cultures. So that's just one example. We have a list, we have a number of resources that we'll be talking about in that session. Where I'm going with this is no matter who owns the mentor program, how is I&D helping and partnering with talent development or whomever to make sure that I&D is incorporated into these conversations and they go beyond the traditional dialogue. The last thing I'll say on this one is, again, we just talked about inclusive leadership education, but like I said, there's a lot of different departments that touch this work, one being talent development, because talent development, one, they can identify, oh my goodness, this program or this training that we already have also touches I&D. It doesn't always have to have I&D in the title, right? So for example, we have at our organization, we have a training on conflict management. And our training coordinator said, this is D&I. I didn't even think about that. Well, we're going to add that to that ILE catalog to make sure people understand if you go through this, you're also meeting some of your needs, some of your ILE needs or credits, getting your credits. And I hope that I'm going slow enough. I wanted to make sure we could get through the PowerPoint. And I know we needed to make up for a little bit of time. Remember, if you have any questions, please reach out to me and I will make sure that I answer them. Next thing that I will share is the Department of Communications and or marketing. Sometimes they're together, sometimes they're apart. Again, we won't get stuck on the department name, but the responsibilities of, who writes the communication. So one partnership here that's huge is inclusive communication campaigns. Look, I hate to say it, really I don't, but some people don't like to hear this. People don't always want to hear from IND. They know how we feel about it. People in my organization know that I'm passionate about inclusion. They want to hear from each other. They want to hear, how did inclusion and these efforts impact other people? I'll give you an example. This month right now is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And we had an individual reach out to me and say, hey, I'm a little person and I would love to help those others in the organization with diverse abilities. Awesome. So that person said, I would be willing to shoot a little video to talk about how inclusion has impacted me. And just a plug, one of the things that she said in the video was that no one would hire her before the city. The city was the first employer to hire her, and she did, so she was in her 30s. And so she went all the way through her 30s, only being able to get part-time employment because she felt that every time she walked in, an organization felt she would be a drain on their resources, their insurance, their accommodations. She would just need too much. She said the city was the first place to hire her. The city is the place she's been with the longest. And there's a level of loyalty there because the city, quote unquote, took a chance on her. And that's one thing I don't really like either, because we just did the right thing. And I will say happily that I was not here 9 years ago. So the city's been doing this, right? Now we're just being more intentional about it. But tying it to communications, being a partner with the communications team, I was able to say, oh my goodness, can we get her into our studio? Can we make this happen? And they're like, absolutely, let's do it. So inclusive communication campaigns are very, very important, and you lean on your communications team to get those done. The next thing I'll say is external branding. And typically I would share a video, but I think due to time, well, I can just fast forward. Let's share this just for a second. And a lot of you may remember this. So I like to show that video, and again, kind of cut it short, but I'm sure a lot of you probably remember this video, this commercial that came out, and there was a big uproar, respectfully. I mean, I could definitely understand the concern. You even had people like Dr. King's daughter saying, I wish daddy would have knew, just hand him a Pepsi, right? And so this commercial, though I'm sure the intention was not bad, really, really came off as culturally insensitive, especially during the time that it came out. There was a lot of social unrest. And so people really feeling like, wow, you got it wrong. Well, how are our organizations making sure that the IND team sees things like this? A lot of times, if the relationship is not there, people will feel like, oh, they just, want to be a cog in the wheel, or they just want their hands on everything. But the truth is, and I cannot say that was the sentiments with Pepsi, let's be really clear, but this is just an example of if people see us as an asset in these conversations and in these decisions, we're able to say, yeah, you may want to rethink this, so that we don't necessarily have really bad, our reputation. We can ruin our reputation through those interactions. The next thing I'll show is the H&M. I'm not sure if you all remember this incident, but this model being in this hoodie, not a good idea. Coolest monkey in the jungle. You may also see that, this little boy's mom was like, oh, get over it. I'm glad the mom felt that way. The mom felt okay with it, but you do have to make sure that who will we offend? A lot of times organizations will just poll their typical 1 or 2 people, not understanding that you really need to make sure that you are getting feedback from a lot of different people, so that, you're not happening to get that one person that's like, that doesn't offend me. It kind of goes it goes to the concept that just because I am Black, someone else that's Black does not have the same sentiments as me. So where this may not bother me, it's going to bother a lot of your customers. So you want to make sure that a lot of opinions and a lot of people are there. The hoodie in itself isn't necessarily bad, but it'd have to go on this model, right? And so those are the kind of things that I&D can help the communications or the marketing or product development team. It can go in different departments, talk through to make sure, look, I&D is not here to railroad every decision that it is that you want to make, but let's make little tweaks so we can make sure that we are just as culturally sensitive as possible, right? And that's how people need to see us when we come in the room. I've heard of too many organizations feeling like their I&D team is too involved or too negative, if you will, of their efforts. And it's like, throw us a bone sometimes too, right? And so we do have to make sure that we're good partners to say, I know that a lot of work went into this hoodie or this product. Let's make this little tweak. And then sometimes it's, let's just take it. Like, let's just take it off the market. This is a bad idea altogether. And it's really good for that relationship to be there for everyone to understand there's a mutual respect rather than I&D just being cumbersome. Like, here comes I&D again. We don't want to be seen in that way. So next, I will say social media presence. I think this goes without really saying too much, but just making sure that we're being very strategic and intentional about our social media presence, anywhere from, how are we sharing what it is that we're doing in the community with I&D? How are we leveraging our business resource groups once again to say, let's get some stories out there, some employee stories, or, the list goes on, but it's really important for I&D and communications for the social media team to be hand in hand in these efforts as well, to make sure that people see your organization as representative to them and as one that cares about their identity and their culture. And then the last one here I'll say is representation is important. And this was the easiest to put it. Target nailed it with this one, right? This went viral whenever this little boy saw himself. Do we always have to have the traditional models included in images? And thinking beyond just gender and race is really, really important. This is phenomenal. That's all I can say. I can only imagine how that mom felt whenever mom, dad, adult in this person's life felt whenever they took this picture. And then the next thing is, and I'm sorry, y'all, usually I would say any questions or whatever it is. So please send your questions to me or your thoughts, your comments through LinkedIn. And I'll put my name back on the screen in a little bit, but I will just continue to move forward. So community relations is really big. How are we making sure that, that was not supposed to say communications, inclusive community sponsorships, right? So how are you working with the team that's, that is responsible for the sponsorships that we have through the community and making sure that they are inclusive. So there is an organization that is traditionally a really big deal. They're in many, I would probably be willing to say, all 50 states, really, really big deal. But what people don't know is that in their bylaws, if you will, they have where they are exclusive to the LGBTQ community. I believe they removed it recently, so that's why I'm not saying any names. But regardless, say that they haven't, or when they hadn't removed it, are you making sure that the I&D team is supporting the community relations team to make sure that we are not sponsoring events that are contradictory to our efforts and what we believe in? Are you making sure, there's organizations out there, food organizations that are very, very clear about their stance and pretty discriminatory? It sends a really loud message whenever we have meals catered. If you have meals catered by this organization, what is that telling the identity or the group that is really, really, that's impacted by those statements that this organization makes, right? So IND needs to be helping community relations think through things like that, but again, be seen as an asset to say, how can we work with these organizations? A lot of times in the organizations, we're helping organizations or community organizations that leaders are really passionate about. So they can feel like, ooh, we better not pull that because so-and-so has a passion about that. Well, let's not pull it, but how can we mentor this organization? How can we let this organization know, hey, heads up, you don't get this change in the next year or two, we're gonna have to pull because we cannot be affiliated. Sometimes you have to have those conversations. Or sometimes the organizations that are just blatantly disrespectful, you need to go on record to say, we're gonna pull it now. And so those are conversations you have to have internally and decisions you have to make internally, but the community relations, again, community investments, whatever it is that you call this department needs to be really clear that IND is to help and not necessarily be a roadblock in your efforts. ERG and community involvement, really big, that employee resource groups, they want to be involved in the community. So how are we partnering them with community relations to just amplify what it is that we already do, or identify the organizations that are important to their group's identity to make sure that we're, being inclusive there. There's a lot that can happen in that partnership as well. And then volunteerism. A lot of times in organizations, you'll see that there are volunteerism policies or opportunities in place. And what I've seen, for example, is organizations will say, here's a list of places that you can volunteer on company time. Is that list inclusive? Right? We need to make sure that IND is helping iron that list out. Same goes with company matches, for example. Oftentimes this department will also handle company matches. Hey, we'll match dollar for dollar up to this amount if you give to these organizations. Again, is that list inclusive? This is where IND should be building that relationship to be an asset, to say, look, we want to try to make this as inclusive as possible and as long as possible and as deep as possible, but making sure that it aligns and does not contradict our efforts. And then this right here, I'll go fast. These are departments that a lot of people, I'm sure, are working with, but product development, are we making sure that our products are nailing the core? Like, are they meeting the needs of our customers? Especially for those that are in big organizations, are they meeting the needs for our customers depending on that region, that state, that city, whatever it looks like, right? Procurement and purchasing, are we making sure that we have a diverse list of contractors, giving different contractors the chance? A lot of times, small businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, they're like, if I could just get the opportunity, well, how is IND helping procurement look through the lens of, in a way that doesn't always give to the bigger organizations when possible? How are we having those conversations? Legal. I really could have a slide just for legal themselves, but legal is a huge partner in this, and they need to see IND as one that respects their word, respects them, and understands that sometimes they may have to say no, but oftentimes, I know not in every organization, they really don't want to. So how can we be great partners to make it a win-win for everyone, right? So legal, I don't know about y'all, but legal is on speed dial for me at every organization that I go to. And then IT. I know it's like, why is IT on here? Oh my goodness. IT is one that can be mutually beneficial in so many ways. I give an example. When Teams first came out, the organization that I was with, their IT team was trying to roll out Teams, but it wasn't really landing. So I'm like, hey, how about our BRG be a champion for you with your Teams work? There were two programs that, two of our BRGs was rolling out, and it was like, how can we leverage Teams to get people acclimated to this new resource for IT? And IT loved it because then people could become SMEs of Teams, and then they got excited and was like, oh my gosh, I need to take this back to my team because we can do this, and this with this resource. But prior to how the BRG decided to leverage it, people were really struggling with adapting it, right? And so that's one way that IT can see I&D as a resource for them. And then they in return want to be a resource for IT or for D&I. See, I'm interchanging D&I and I&D. But so along those lines, I will say, for example, SharePoint. I don't know about you all, but at multiple organizations that I've been with, we've used SharePoint as our intranet site. And sometimes SharePoints can be like really wonky and not the cutest. But if IT is involved, they can show you some of the really neat things that can be done behind, on the back end to make it feel like more of a web page, or they can build you different, apps like we just talked about, or just the list goes on. But they need to see you as a mutually beneficial partner in this work and not someone that's just always with their hand out, to be honest. And then the last thing I'll say is people leaders. People leaders are some of your biggest partners in this, right? So I'm very passionate about working with people leaders, especially when it comes to people volunteering for I&D. So one example, going back to the tracker that I told you that one of our volunteers are making. I was in conversation with this person's leader, and I said, I've really been impressed with this person, and I really think that this person will be a really good asset to helping us develop some kind of way. I didn't even know that an app could be done. I just was like, some kind of way to track leaders' progress and their engagement with inclusive leadership, this inclusive leadership catalog that we're building. And I said, so if this person is available, I'd love to tap them. Now, remember here, the key is I went to the leader before I went to them, because the leader is going to be able to tell me, oh, this person has a promotion coming down the pipe, so it's really a bad time. This person has a really big project that they're working on, so we probably shouldn't ask them. Or this person is having some performance issues and we don't need to ask them. You don't want to put the leader in a position to have to tell the person you can't do this. So people leaders need to see me as respectful and really just coming to them. You'd be surprised how many people leaders say, thank you so much for coming to me, because oftentimes people just go around me and then I'm in a situation where I just have to make it work because I don't want to seem like a roadblock to this person's success. But there's some things that I'm able to see that other people can't see. So back to the example about the tracker though, the leader said, I would love for so-and-so to be involved. And what I did was I actually gave two options, and they said, we would really like for this person to be involved with the tracker development, because that would also benefit something that we're working on in our department. Win-win, right? But had I not reached out to that people leader and really talked to that people leader in this way and gave them options and things like that, we would have never known that both of us could benefit from this work. I'll say one more thing here. When I reach out to people leaders, I often say, look, I want you to understand all of the ways that this person will benefit, and they'll be able to develop by taking on this project or working on this team. So come performance review time, please reach out to me if you want any feedback on this person's engagement, if you want any feedback that you can include in the performance review. These are ways that people leaders really need to start, the lens that people leaders need to start looking at D&I through, because that way they can start a lot of times people leaders feel like, well, here goes this extra thing that we have to do, or this extra thing that so-and-so wants to be a part of. But if you can start building these relationships and having these conversations, it starts to change their narrative and the way they look at the programs that you all are rolling out, that we're rolling out as I&D professionals and I&D teams. So what I'll end with is, remember that these relationships should be mutual. And I think that I've driven this part home, this point home. But people need to see us as assets, y'all. A lot of times, far too often, I hear people say, our I&D team just really doesn't really understand that, our capacity is maxed out, or, whatever that may be. And that's just key to building a really strong relationship. If you think about the personal relationships in your life, when people always have their hands out, it's like, yeah, this is not benefiting me at all, and it's actually weighing on me heavily. And you tend to remove yourselves from those situations often. And that doesn't mean that you all can always help each other at the same time. Going back to personal relationships, there are times in your lives that you may be able to help someone else when they're in need, but you know that in the future, they would help you, or they would do the same thing for you if they could. And that's what's important in these relationships. There was a time, for example, that our PIM team, so public information team, they put together our United Way campaign and they didn't have enough volunteers at an event. I had the time, so I said, look, let me double my shift. I'll double my shift and I'll be a volunteer. It impacted my relationship with that individual so much to say, I'll give you time. And so how are you looking for opportunities like that rather than, oh, I did what I needed to do, I'm going to step away now. Really ask your people what is it that they need, and how can you help them as well, even if it has nothing to do with I&D. But you'd be surprised just how much does have to do with I&D. For example, United Way. There's a lot of things that touches with I&D there. And in this particular example, I was serving food to our employees. So it also benefits me for my employees to see me being willing to stand there and serve them and have conversations with them, and talk to them, get to know their names, you know. And so on my second shift, instead of serving food, I just walked the line, telling people where to go and build relationships with people. That didn't hurt me in any kind of way, to give that time and to make sure that my partner knew that I was there to be beneficial for her team as well.
Shalynne, thank you so much for sharing. Yep, great. This is exactly what I was about to point to. Let us know how we can stay in connection with you.
It is right here.
Excellent.
So sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, just find me. Let's talk.
Thanks, Shalynne. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I know that I am leaving with lots of great insights and questions to stay percolating on. So we look forward to being in touch with you. Thanks for your time and your brilliance today. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.